Hi, and welcome back. Today we're going to take an in-depth look at the scope of work of a yoga teacher or a yoga therapist. In this training, we're talking about trauma-informed yoga. But it's important to understand that a certification in yoga or a certification in yoga therapy doesn't make us an expert in yoga or yoga therapy. It means that we've been trained to use the tools found within the practices and that we have been trained on how to hold space and guide our students. Just like a math teacher isn't an expert in calculus, a yoga teacher isn't an expert in yoga or the inner workings of the body and mind. Ultimately, we're practitioners first. We're students. And then our love of the practice takes us on a path of self-discovery and self-inquiry where we arrive in the seat of a teacher. But we have to remember that we're always a student first and we're always learning. We don't really know what someone else is going through. Human beings have a tendency to try to project their own perception of the world onto others. And part of the practice of yoga is to pull back and observe rather than just react. When we do this, we can see our attachments and we can ask ourselves why we have these attachments. When we practice in this way, we can come clean to our students without our projected material creating an agenda. Why is any of this important when we're talking about scope of work? It's important because understanding where these motivating factors come from help us to understand why we do the things that we do. We're not bad or wrong for wanting to try to fix someone, but ultimately nobody needs any fixing. It's all a misunderstanding. Many times we want to fix others because we feel like we ourselves are broken, or perhaps we feel like we were broken in the past. But again, this is a misunderstanding because you can't be broken. You're whole and complete just as you are. There's nothing you need to do, nothing you need to acquire, no additional training you need to receive to be perfect, complete in your non-separate wholeness. And the practice is all about getting there, right? The practice is about actually realizing that we are whole. The practice is awakening into our enlightened state of being that's always there, it's always present, and practicing remembering more than we forget. When we practice remembering, we establish ourselves in self-realization, and self-realization yields an open, clean conduit for compassion. And that's what's required to teach yoga efficiently. When we experience trauma, it actually affects the way that our brain processes information. It all takes place in the amygdala and the hippocampus. The amygdala stores our reactions to things and our fear, and the hippocampus stores our memories and our perceptions of the world. And together, these two work in a way to solidify patterns that are established in early childhood and adolescence. If we've experienced trauma as a young child or even an adolescent or maybe even a young adult, we are permanently affected by this in the chemistry of our brain. Now, it doesn't mean that we can't heal from it, and it doesn't mean that we can't bring congruency to the incongruency that is present. But ultimately, that's not the job of a yoga teacher. That's the job of a psychotherapist. A yoga teacher's job is to help our students and clients to connect mind, body, and spirit. And we use the Pancha-Maya Kosha system to do this. Pancha meaning 5, Kosha meaning sheaths. The 5 energetic sheaths of the body are our way in to working with our clients energetically. We have the physical body, the energetic body, the mental body, the intellectual or wisdom body, and then the body of the soul or the heart. Primarily, yoga teachers work with the first three. And the first two we work in an overt way, actively engaging in the physical and energetic body. When we come to the mental body, that's a little bit more covert, and it has nothing to do with us and everything to do with the student. We're inviting them to take a look at their thoughts and feelings and the way that they experience sensation through the lens of objectivity. But we're not actually processing with them. Let me give you an example of how what we do is different than what a therapist does. Let's say I go to my favorite yoga teacher and I tell her that I've really been having a hard time connecting to my body because of sexual trauma that I've experienced. My yoga teacher might be tempted to ask me questions or to initiate some sort of cognitive processing, but that's not a good idea. We're not trained in that field. If you are a psychotherapist, then that's a whole different story, and there are different rules and regulations that have to do with using your license outside of the scope of your practice. And we don't need to discuss that today because we're talking about teaching yoga or being a yoga therapist. If I were to say these things to my yoga teacher, the appropriate way for her to hold space would be to listen actively, to use her body language to show me that she cares, not her words, and to ask me if I have support cognitively, and then to check in and see how the experience of being on my mat is impacting my healing journey. There's no story required. There's no processing necessary. Now, if I went to my psychotherapist and I had the same conversation, maybe I said something to the effect of, I'm really having a hard time getting into my body because of this sexual trauma I've experienced, my psychotherapist might ask me, what that feels like when it comes up for me, where I feel it in the body, how I'm moving through it, what thoughts or feelings are associated with it, how does it make me feel about myself. For those of you who have experienced therapy, these are all pretty normal questions for a therapist to ask, but they are not appropriate for a yoga teacher to ask. When we're holding space for our students, we're listening. We're not offering suggestions. We're not trying to problem solve. We're not trying to fix anything. That's not our job. Our job is to listen and to bring them back to the breath. Sometimes when people talk to me about their traumatic experiences, whether I'm teaching a public asana class or providing someone yoga therapy, I will watch their body language. When I see that they are becoming aroused and they're initiating the sympathetic nervous system's fight, flight, freeze response, I'll begin to help them to ground. I'll say, okay, let's take a moment and just come back to our breath. Maybe placing one hand on the heart and one hand on the belly, connecting to the sensations that are present when we breathe in and when we breathe out. I might ask them to take a few breaths with me. And then after I see that they've regulated, I'll ask them how they feel. And then I might educate them and say, that was a self-regulation technique that uses breath awareness and body awareness to help you come back to the present moment. It's also called orienting, and you can use that whenever you start to feel anxious, when you're recalling or remembering something. See, right there, I haven't tried to help them to process anything cognitively, but rather I've given them some tools that are embedded within the yoga practice to help them to come back to the present moment and de-escalate the sympathetic nervous system's response to their thoughts and feelings. That's the job of a yoga teacher. So as you move through this training, you will learn some things about how we can use different techniques within yoga to help our clients and students process through trauma in the body and the mind. But you'll note that we don't talk about processing cognitive material. We are not going to give you tools to help your clients and students work through their trauma in a conversational way. Rather, we're going to give you practical tools to help you to hold space for groups who are healing from traumatic experiences. And we will give you some specialized tools to help you work with individuals one-on-one. Please remember that if at any time you feel like you are in over your head or that you need help from a licensed clinical professional, do not hesitate to reach out. We recommend that every yoga teacher and yoga therapist have a list of practitioners that are local and can be called at any time. If you do feel like you need to refer your client or student to someone, rather than saying something to the effect of, "I really think you need therapy," it's better to say something to the effect of, "Do you have someone to talk to about these things?" When I say it like that, I'm showing that I'm a concerned party. I want to make sure they're supported. But when I tell them they really need to think about going to therapy, I sound insensitive and judgmental. Languaging is really important when we're working with people who have experienced trauma. Everything we say can and will activate. Choosing our words carefully and remembering the less we talk, the better, is a winning strategy. I hope you found this lecture helpful. Ultimately, if you're a yoga teacher or a yoga therapist, remember, it's not your job to process cognitive material. You can teach your students tools found within yoga to help them to learn how to regulate their nervous system. You can teach them about how trauma is stored in the body, and you can teach them about how trauma affects the brain. When they start to go into story, when they start to forget who and what and where they are, bring them back to the present moment, redirect them, ground them, and orient them. That will help them more than anything else.